Go. All right. So good morning, everyone, for this webinar, this 5th Creative Spark webinar. Today's webinar will be about 2 of our entrepreneurship scholars sharing their experience about bringing the entrepreneurship model online. Before we start, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. So this is the 5th webinar of our Creative Spark series, hosted by Newcastle University and the Center for Analysis of Economic Reforms and Communication in Azerbaijan. Creative Spark is a higher education program sponsored by the British Council, and Newcastle University has been supporting entrepreneurship educators in Azerbaijan for the last 2 years. We have organized 8 webinars, and so 3 more are coming up, and you can find the information on our website, but I will also email them later on. This session will be recorded, so if you do not like to be on video, you're welcome to switch off your camera. But throughout the webinar, please kindly mute your microphone. But once you ask a question later on, it would be lovely if you can just show your face and unmute yourself to ask the question in person. So we will have a Q&A after the presentations. So I will also send a quick survey after the webinar, just to get your feedback about what we can improve and what can be done better. So I would appreciate your feedback. But without further ado, we're going to our webinar with Dr. Jonathan Kimmitt, who's Senior Lecturer in Entrepreneurship here at the Newcastle University Business School, and Abdullah Al Manum from University of Northampton, but also a PhD student here at Newcastle. And they will both share a little bit about their experience bringing entrepreneurship modules online, what worked, what didn't work, but also hopefully we can have a lively discussion afterward, what worked for you, and just exchange some experience. So without further ado, I stop sharing and you can go ahead, Jonathan, and start your presentation.
Brilliant, thanks, Andrea. Right. Ooh, screen's doing funny things. 2 seconds. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Tell me if not. So thanks for the introduction, Andrea, and thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you about bringing entrepreneurship modules online. So I'm going to talk for the first, 15, 20 minutes, and then Abdullah's going to follow. And obviously the context behind everything that I'm talking about today is that the move to online has been something that's been imposed on us, and so some of the things I'm talking about today are things that I've had to think through as an entrepreneurship educator about best ways to bring good elements from entrepreneurship pedagogy to make it try and work in the sort of online environment. But obviously some things have been enforced upon us in terms of what the university wants to do, in terms of how we're structuring it, how much time we're spending with students. But what I want to talk about today is kind of some of those structural elements about how it's worked and what seems to have worked well. Some of those things that I've had the freedom to try to incorporate into my teaching, which seems to have gone well or perhaps less well. So hopefully it gives you a bit of food for thought in this, I guess, mid-pandemic context that it sort of feels like we're in. And I think, regardless of what happens, I'm going to talk about the UK here, where it sort of feels like we're starting to come towards potentially the end and we're potentially going back to see students more in person. I think inevitably a lot of this online learning will stay. And next year they're talking about, kind of more hybrid approaches. So I hope that in some of the things I talk about today, some of it might be useful for some of your own teaching, whether or not it's entrepreneurship or not. So I'm going to talk about in order to talk about what it's like to bring an entrepreneurship module online, I'm going to talk about what it was like offline, and therefore how I tried to make the transition for this particular module I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk specifically about a module called International Entrepreneurship. This is a final year undergraduate module with around about 65 to 70 students. Most of these students are on a program called International Business Management, whereby they actually spend 4 years at university, and one of those years is a study abroad, because half of their degree is business management and half of their degree is studying a language. So there's a strong international flavor to this module. I'm also specifically talking about how I teach it in our second semester. So the first semester has a different focus. I'm talking about the second semester because it's more of a kind of, I guess, a sort of classic entrepreneurship pedagogy of students developing their own business ideas. So I'm going to talk briefly about what it was like when it was taught in person, and then subsequently talk about some of the deliberations I had last summer regarding how to actually effectively move the module online. I'll then talk about what it looks like as an online module and some of the outcomes and examples from students' work, and some reflections in terms of a summary. I'll then hand over to Abdullah, and he'll take you through his approach to online delivery with some really interesting examples from case studies and use of guest speakers, and around his own personal experience of being a social entrepreneur. So hopefully the two presentations will dovetail nicely in that respect. So firstly, I just want to talk about what this module looked like when it was taught in person in, I guess, more normal times. So as I mentioned before, this is a final year module. Most of the students on it, it is an elective module. So the idea is that this is something that they want to learn about entrepreneurship. It's a topic that they are generally interested in. And my experience of teaching this over the years is that they're a very motivated group, a very talented group, and they're generally speaking very, very good to teach. And so the module has been structured historically. We have 2 semesters. The first semester is around internationalizing businesses. So has more of a theoretical angle. The second semester is what you're seeing in front of you here, which is students are tasked with, in small groups, they must plan and research an enterprise with a focus on a social or environmental issue. So students are tasked with basically becoming social entrepreneurs, and they work in small groups in order to develop a particular business idea and do the research around it. So our second semesters are, 2 to 3 months long, sort of 4 months if you include the assessment period. So there's not scope for them to launch the business or anything like that. Don't really have the time. It's more about development of concept and scoping out a business model and doing the research around it. So historically, we have done 2-hour lectures, and that makes it sound like, oh my God, 2 hours of listening to me talk must be mind-numbing, and I think it probably is for most people. But because of the class size, we have 65 to 70. I've usually set up the room in a way that you have groups sat together, and it's much more activity-based. So the lectures actually incorporate small group work as well. So it's quite interactive. And the traditional pedagogy has been this kind of flipped classroom approach, right? Where it's not me just talking at them about theory for 2 hours. There are activities that's linked to them developing this business idea. So they're doing things around idea generation. They're doing things around business model development. We have workshops. We get them to look at understanding their social impact, developing things like growth strategies, getting them to present their work, etc., etc. And historically, this is, I think, like a lot of entrepreneurship modules, is assessed through a reflective piece of work. So getting them to think about what they've learned as a result of developing their own business idea, what they've learned about themselves, what they've learned about the social environmental issue they're trying to solve, how that relates and is consistent with academic literature. And I guess one of the things I'll emphasize in this presentation, and one of the things I emphasize when I teach, is I try to get them to step outside of the classroom as much as possible. So go and talk to people in the real world. So rather than it just being a desk-based exercise, I want them to engage with local communities, engage with relevant people in the public sector, suppliers, customers, whoever it is, to actually kind of test their ideas in the real world. Sorry. So and historically, there's also been a group presentation. I think that's quite common in entrepreneurship pedagogy. So when COVID hit the UK anyway, in sort of mid-March last year, we weren't able to do the group presentations. That had to be cancelled. We ended up doing a different assessment. And then over the summer, I then had a period of kind of reflection and thinking about how to do this in an online environment, having absolutely zero experience of having to do that sort of thing before. So these were some of the things that I was thinking about last summer, about how to move from that offline format, which has worked really, really well. Students have historically really enjoyed the module. They like the fact that it's different from a kind of more commercial, enterprisey type module where it's just about profit and loss and all of that stuff. So I think they like the fact that they are, engaging in real world social and environmental issues. So I was trying to think, how can I best retain all of that in a way that the university will allow me to do, and in a way that would make the most sense for the students. So how to do this kind of entrepreneurship pedagogy in this online format, and this sort of flipped classroom approach. What the sorts of things I was thinking of was how to best kind of replicate that when all you've got is a Zoom call or a Teams call. I was thinking about how to best portray certain messages from the module that I want them to take forward. So basically, a lot of the content in the second semester is built around my own research to a certain extent. One aspect of my own research is the extent to which social entrepreneurs make assumptions about the social environmental issues they're trying to solve. So, thinking about social environmental issues beyond it just being a technological issue or a technical problem to solve, thinking about real social complexity and thinking about actually how social environmental issues get solved in the real world. And to the extent that I'm trying to get across that it's actually much more than just a business issue, it's much more than just an entrepreneurial issue. It's societal, it's complex, it's interdependent, all of these things. And that's one of the reasons I really like them to go and speak to people in the community, speak to people in the public sector, other charities maybe doing similar work, because that gives them a real sense of what these social environmental issues are like. So, but I knew that in a COVID world, there was going to be fewer of these touch points, and so potentially reduced learning experiences. So how was I going to get that across? How was I going to get these key messages across in that context? I was also thinking about, well, how can we use a lot of what's happened in the pandemic actually as almost as a strength and something that we can actually kind of leverage. And so part of one of my early, the first lectures was to say, look, the pandemic has actually shone a light on a whole lot of social or environmental issues. So how can we take that experience and think about good ways to solve these social or environmental issues? And the vast majority, I think, of students this year, they sort of use that to set the scene for their business idea. Things like mental health, for example, or the environmental impact of masks and PPE. Those are a lot of the early ideas that students were coming up with. So I was thinking about how to best incorporate that. And I think probably from a more practical, maybe not practical level, but I was really mindful last summer as well about student well-being. And this is been an enormous issue. I was actually reading about 15 minutes before this webinar. The Office for National Statistics just released a report on mental health issues of students in higher education. And it said, I think 55% of students have reported serious mental health issues in the last year. So one of the things the university was saying to us last year was, try if you can to go to individual assignments, because that's going to make it much easier if you're just teaching online, that everyone has an individual assignment, and doing group work was likely to be very, very challenging. But I thought, well, that's going to be very difficult and will require a significant rewrite of the course. And secondly, that it would mean that it would be very difficult for students to do the work required for developing a business idea, because it's a lot of work and really needs to be shared amongst kind of 4 to 6 people. And lastly, and I think most importantly, my expectation was that this year students were going to feel more isolated than ever before. And therefore, actually, we probably need more group work than we've ever had. We need them to be talking to each other. Otherwise, they're literally just going to be sat in front of their laptops, reading academic articles, writing essays, assignments, without actually talking to anyone. So that sense of community within their course and within the module, I think, was really important to try and keep as much of that as we could. So I wanted to make sure that the group work was retained, but that we kept a close eye on it, and that no issues around, because group work can be challenging, that we kind of reduce some of those issues. So this was the course that I ended up designing for the second semester, and there's nothing radically different here from really what was in that early slide. And one of the methods I took, and I think I might tweak this a little bit for next year, depending on what the universities require us to do. Some of my colleagues decided to completely, took the opportunity to completely change things that they were doing and completely rethink how to do it. I tried to keep it as close as possible to the way that I taught the module previously. Mainly because it had worked previously, and the sort of the flow of you learn this week, and the kind of the scaffolding of learning that comes from the first lecture through the second and the third and the fourth, and how the seminars work in between it, just makes complete sense. And so doing anything different would have been, I think, an own goal on my part. So I tried to incorporate all of the lecture material in the same way, and then bring in these seminars around it. So the university asked us to basically have all of our lectures as 1 hour, and to be pre-recorded, and then to have a set of activities attached to that. So all of the lectures were shorter than I had done previously, but then the students were given particular tasks to do off the back of those lectures. That those tasks would then sort of flow into what they were going to be doing in the subsequent seminar. So that was the sort of the logic behind the way it worked. So for example, there's a second lecture on defining a social environmental problem and developing a business idea. There were a set of sort of questions around their own previous experiences and their own skill sets and prior knowledge, and that fed into what they did in the second seminar, which is something called an idea canvas, where they actually map out in their teams, as a result of reflecting on their own experiences and prior knowledge, they map out in their teams what good idea might look like. And I think from an educator's point of view, developing this was the thing I found the hardest, because trying to make sure that everything flowed from, because when you're teaching when you're doing the sort of 2-hour lectures previously, and it's just a seminar. When I was doing the 2 hours lectures previously, and you just had them in the room for that period of time, you could just kind of instruct away, but you don't have that sense of control as an educator here. So you have to be much more, you have to provide much more instructions about what they should be doing and when, and how it feeds into what. And that was the bit I found the most challenging, as to thinking through exactly what was going to be feeding into what. So the main activities they were doing really were idea development in the seminars, then business model development, which was essentially just a workshop. And I used a website which some of you may be familiar with called Padlet. And this is a sort of an interactive collaborative tool. And so they were all able to type in their different ideas and different aspects of components of the business model in seminar 3. And that was because that was part of their assessment. And then in seminar 4, they did an investment pitch. This was about 6 weeks after teaching had started. Again, really informal, but all really useful for their learning, which they documented in their essay. So that's I guess the crux of it. The assessment itself did have to change from what had been done previously, in that I had to really remove any group presentation component. Felt like that was going to be a step too far to incorporate that successfully. It's something that I'm looking at potentially for next year. But they did, as I said previously, they did actually do an investment pitch. And the way I used that was, it was sort of central to them documenting their learning, so that they could talk about their investment pitch within their reflective essay. So they did this reflective essay, which is similar to what they'd been doing previously, where they brought in relevant entrepreneurship literature and kind of reflected on their own strengths and weaknesses and their interests in entrepreneurship. What I did was, and I've always done, is to bring in the business model, the sort of the group work side of it. I bring it in a much more formative way. So it's used to evidence their learning, but they're not assessed directly on what they do in their team. What usually happens, though, is the teams that have been really proactive and have been developing a business idea, they are the ones that actually end up doing a really, really good reflective essay. So it's very difficult for a student to do limited work in the development of the business idea and then write a good reflective essay. So in terms of kind of what went wrong, or what I felt was more positive and more negative, some of these things really surprised me. Some of these things didn't. Weirdly, the engagement with the lecture materials and theoretical concepts from the module seemed to be much, much better, I think, than in previous years. I'm not sure if that's something to do, that's obviously because the lectures are pre-recorded, that information is there for them to go back over. I guess that information was always provided in old times, but maybe because the quality of the recordings now, as opposed to the old recap system that we had, which just recorded, the audio of the lecture, is much, much better. So perhaps that's something to do with it, but I guess it allows them to revise concepts much more. And that's given me something really to think about for next year, because I think one of the things we're going to do is, where I am talking about theory, is to make sure that is pre-recorded, because it seems to be something that they do get, but they get much better at understanding it, and when they're able to go back and to revise it. Attendance seemed to be better than previous, which I was very surprised by. I'm not sure if some of the students would attend but not necessarily always engage, which I found surprising. But generally speaking, attendance was very good. I know, and this was one of my main concerns about interaction of students and whether or not they were going to be isolated. I know that students really valued teamwork. They really valued having a module where they were in groups rather than just working by themselves. One thing I thought was really interesting was, so the students are assessed on a reflective essay. I think it was really interesting how a lot of students brought in their personal experiences from the last year to actually talk about and to even integrate with academic literature. So it led to really, really high levels of good reflective writing. One thing I learned as well is the importance of routines when it comes to doing online modules. So I actually would set myself, and this is something I suggested for students to do in terms of their own timetable. So make sure you if you want to listen to my lectures, do it at 2 o'clock every Wednesday afternoon and just put that in your diary. And I think that seems to work for them. But I did exactly the same thing. And that's something that I've learned is really important, I think, to schedule time for recording your own lectures. So I would record all of my lectures every Monday and Tuesday, each afternoon, for them to then go online for the Monday afterwards. And I did that every single week for sort of 8-9 weeks. That seemed to work really well. In terms of downsides, tell me here if I'm running out of time, Andrea, if I'm okay to continue. One of the downsides I felt was lack of module leader oversight. So whereas usually you used to walk around the classroom and speaking to students in groups, it's very difficult to do that in breakout rooms in the time that we had. So some students I spoke to very little. Some students I had more input into, and that's challenging, I think, from us in terms of providing the right kind of support. I do think the module was weaker for the fact that students weren't able to get out of the classroom because of restrictions, and this kind of desk-based understanding of the social environmental issues they were interested in, I don't think is quite as useful for the module as it could be in more normal times, and therefore I found that the sort of a sense of module community was quite difficult to build. I definitely think that some of the groups felt like they had a little community going, but in terms of interactions between groups, that was very, very, very challenging. And lastly, one of the things I noticed was one of the common issues, I think, for those of you who taught entrepreneurship modules is students not willing to step outside of a student market idea. So this is an idea that is for helping students in terms of their mental health issues or something like that. They always tend to go to what they know. I think in previous times there was less of this, but there seems to be students who are much more risk averse this year. So some little reflections here. And these are just some examples. I won't go into this in too much detail. These guys did really well, not necessarily because they had a really good business name, but this was a student group looking at unemployment in Newcastle and around running entrepreneurship programs for underprivileged unemployed in Newcastle. These guys were, this was their business model canvas for a health food company, which was really interesting. These guys were looking at student mental health and developing a dog walking business to give students a bit of time away from university, and so that they could go and spend some time with people who needed to have their dogs walked at whenever it was. So we had some really, really high quality. I was really, really pleased with the kind of high quality of work and business ideas that developed this year. And actually I've been pleasantly surprised by how well students have coped in terms of the work and in terms of the demands, given that the module was online. So overall reflections before I hand over to Abdullah. I think the way I've structured this module this year, I think it's been really important for students because it's been interactive and it's allowed them to work with other students, perhaps in a way that some of the modules which are more individual, perhaps more theoretical, has maybe slightly isolated them a little bit more. It's been fascinating to see how a lot of the students have really utilized some of their personal experiences from the pandemic and actually be able to draw on those experiences to design a potential business solution, more broadly speaking, in that space. But I do feel that the module probably isn't sufficiently immersive. And if a lot of this is going to be online next year, which I don't think it will at the moment, but if I were to repeat this, I would have to think a little bit more about how to make the module more immersive in terms of different social business ideas. And I've personally learned the value of thinking through the flow of the module from the outset, because I think the structure for both myself and for the students has been one of the things that I think has made the module, broadly speaking, successful this year. So that's it from me. So I'll hand over to Abdullah, and I think I'm going to be managing the slides for you.
Yeah.
Thanks, and I'll yeah, just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Yes, so you can move on to the next one. So yeah, so my module I'm going to focus on today is social impact and entrepreneurship. So this is more focused on sort of social and sustainable side of business and the idea. So it's very similar to Jonathan's module, which is Newcastle. This is in Northampton. It's just different type of universities. So our class sizes are a lot smaller, and it's part of international business management program as well. So have international travel and language learning opportunity for the students. So my experience with this module, what happened with Northampton is we already had what we call active blended learning. So even before we moved on to this fully virtual classroom, we are already doing some sort of pre-recorded classes, then activities for the students to do before coming to the class. And the class was more like a discussion. So for me, it was easier to switch. I think the kind of less preparation. So I need to tweak a little bit. So we had that component which made it easier for me. So while we had the face-to-face and online and vice versa, we've been doing it. And we kept it at Northampton, the classes. So the students came to the class face on virtual classrooms, which is about an hour and a half each week. So I had the sort of contact or with the whole group every week. So that was, I think, helped me more actually to manage the module and manage the class. And so I'll go into more details about my focus will be more of the activities. So what Jonathan already told you, we had experienced kind of similar things in terms of maintaining the routine, attendance has improved. So all these things I'm not going to go over again, sort of repeating the thing. So I'll focus on more what worked well for me while running this module last year. What are the sort of activities I have brought in or changed in terms of online delivery and which worked really well. So that will be my focus. So one thing, so if you go to next slide, Jonathan, sorry, is the online delivery and assessment wise, what we did, we similar sort of things. So we created groups. So in Northampton, we use Blackboard. So I have the students worked in small groups. So I created regular groups for them already. So if 4 or 5 people, so every group had their own meeting point. So within the module, where in a certain times, either after the class or any other day, which worked for the group, they regularly met, and I could go in and keep an eye sort of on the attendance, or sometimes if I didn't have time, I could check later on who attended, because Blackboard automatically record people's login and log out time. So that was one of the things, and I felt monitoring those group works it's very important, especially if I just left it as a breakout, like sort of group rooms on Blackboard, and sometimes you didn't check it, you sort of lose control of the group. And especially in this time when so many things going on in people's life, it's making sure that everything is okay. I think that's a very important aspect. One thing I changed with the assessment, which is similar like Jonathan's module, we had group presentation, but instead of changing it completely, I moved it to sort of a video presentation. So where I brought in the IT technicians from the university to work with each group, where they created their individual presentation and put them together as one video. So they learned a little bit of editing and added skills, so which I think some of the module evaluation, they found it very helpful for their learning, and sort of they feel like they have learned new skills. So maybe a little bit of added pressure, but it worked well for majority of the group. So that was the slight change I had to make for this group. So now we're going to talk about a few things which really worked well in terms of online delivery. Next slide, if you can. Sorry, Jonathan, yeah. Yeah, the case study. Case study was one of the things I always used it, and I think most of the academics, especially entrepreneurship or any other modules we talk about, we use case study because it's a good sort of story, tell the story about businesses, about entrepreneurs. And I always found that very effective in terms of when you teach entrepreneurship module. But what I did this year, I really focused on local entrepreneurs instead of bringing like big businesses or sort of telling a story about Jeff Bezos or something like that. I opted to go for, like, this is one of the examples which I use. The case study is a business in Birmingham, so which is only about our journey from Northampton. This lady, she started a business during the pandemic. It's up and running, very successful. It's a first sustainable business run by ethnic minority entrepreneurs in Birmingham. So I used her case study. So I interviewed her, and I used her case study where I think the students connected really well, rather than thinking like, comparing their ideas or things to somebody really big or multinational organizations. They were able to connect it with the local small entrepreneur, which is their next door neighbor. So that's kind of worked really well. So I learned that going forward now, if I bring case studies, I'll try to bring more local or national rather than international. A lot of the books and things always talks about multinational organizations, but bringing in local businesses, I think it's a key where students can connect. So that was one of the important learning point. And then another thing we did, next slide, Jonathan, sorry, if you can do that. Is that I brought in guest speaker. So similar thing. So we worked on the case studies, the example I have given. So I managed to bring her, the entrepreneur, as a guest speaker in my class. So because of the personal connection I had, that was one of the good thing. I think the student could listen to her story from her, what a case study they just worked on in previous classes. So that they could link it to the business and the entrepreneur, which gives them a real sense of sort of learning and learning from someone who actually done it. So that was one thing. Another thing we did, sort of case study or in a guest speaker point of view, I think this is the online things that's helped me, which is I brought in one of my friend who is a grants compliance manager for an international charity in Canada. He's based in Toronto. So I think because of online, this is, I would say, positive things. I was able to bring him as a guest speaker in my class, where he didn't need to fly from Canada to UK or all these costs and all this time. It was easier to just organize in a couple of few weeks time, just set up a time when he's free. So we brought him as a guest speaker where the students could ask him about, he talked about funding for social entrepreneurship and funding for other sort of non-profit organizations as well. And how I did these guest speaker things. So in a normal time, pre-COVID or in a conventional classroom, I would just bring a guest speaker. They will share their experience. The student will ask questions if they had. But because of these online things and what I did, I got the students, I have given them their history of the guest speaker, so a little bit of background, LinkedIn account, so they could research them and then prepare interview question beforehand. So before the guest speaker coming to the class, and after the guest speaker talked about their experience or shared their ideas, the students will interview them. So that was a thing. And if you look at one of the sort of feedback from one of my students, say they found this interviewing process really effective learning, where they didn't need to think about this question straight away within in the class, where they could prepare what they want to know from this person, what sort of information they would like to know. So they could prepare a set of questions, and they had a group sort of people interviewed each entrepreneur, and everybody taking notes. So that worked well. So I think this just tweaking those tasks, which we already did case studies, we already did guest speaker pre-COVID, but adding a little bit or making it more active task had helped them, the students, to interact better in terms of their learning materials. So that was second thing. And final one, so I wouldn't take too long. So next slide, Jonathan, if you want to go. Another thing I helped is sort of bringing my personal experience. So I run a social enterprise in Bangladesh. And what I managed to do is share my journey with the students. So kind of looking how I started, how do I sort of identify those opportunities for the sustainable social enterprise, the process of this journey. And I shared some of these, so the Instagram account of this business, social media, so other Twitters and websites. So the student could see that while I am working with them in this module, I am actually practicing this as well. And if an academic has an opportunity to do something like this, I think it adds value to the module and to the topic. And one of the great thing happened or come out from this module, if you see, one of my students of this cohort actually started her own sustainable fashion brand while we kind of come into the module. So which was really, satisfying things for me. And I feel bringing that sort of emotional side, personal experience to that in this sort of module overall, but especially online, it helps where the students can connect. I think that was one of the important things. And to sort of echo with Jonathan's point, I think group work, definitely it works. And I think that's for the sense of community, the students, all these mental health issues, isolation. I am an advocate of group work as well, especially this time where we are all sort of stuck in our homes on our own most of the time. I think sharing ideas, working with people, it motivates people to work better, and it definitely worked well while delivering this module online. So that's, I think, some of the practices which really worked for me. So the last bit is what did I learn and what kind of things I'm going to take forward. It's looking at sort of encouraging interaction. That's a very important thing. Before I would probably show a video and we just have a discussion, but I make sure that the students write a reflective piece based on the video we watch, or sort of they prepare an interview question for a guest speaker. So it's making this more sort of active task, I think helps the students keep in, I'd say, in track with the module and sort of keep them interesting, making use of small activities, regular activities, which helps if you are running the module sort of synchronously. So that worked well. Knowledge creation, so get them create stuff. So the video, although at the beginning I wasn't too sure about what how they will think, but they love it. They do all these Instagram reels and all this stuff. So if you give them a task to create their own videos, they enjoy it, especially this young generation now. So that sort of giving them that they can create knowledge, it helps them. Peer-to-peer, that sort of things, and tutor interaction, which is really important. So group works, discussion forum. So we kept a discussion forum going, regular discussion forum, where I had to do a little bit more work, sort of answer those questions or queries. I put that time aside. So example, I followed a routine. So every week, so just one day, one afternoon for an hour, I'll just go through that and answer those questions in the discussion forum. And using sort of approaches to task design that engages with the emotion. So people connect there, as Jonathan mentioned already, that mental health issues, something like homelessness, which they see on their way to the university. So a lot of things we talked about, fashion brands, about how sort of unethical the fashion industry is, why the students really interested in fashion. So bringing their emotional responses and emotional connection, attachment with the module, I think helps the students keep motivated. So that was some of the tricks. I think it worked for me. Otherwise, more or less, I think we all, me and Jonathan, we both faced sort of similar experience of bringing this module and going forward. I agree with Jonathan as well. That is, I think a hybrid approach will be the future, and that's we can see as well. And I'm already looking at next year, planning for next term, which is sort of delivering theory maybe via online class and doing some practical activities in class. And that's the way forward. So I think that's it from me. Yeah. So thank you. And this is my emails and contact details. I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, so we open up the floor for questions. Thank you, Jonathan and Abdullah. It's been really interesting. So if you do have a question, it would be lovely if you unmute your microphone and just ask in person, or you can post it in the chat. I can read it out, whatever you prefer. So any first takers on questions? Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a few questions. Actually, for Johnny first, if I could please. So the university started using Canvas. Were there any benefits over Blackboard you perceived using Canvas?
I mean, I can't really compare like with like, because I didn't have the opportunity to, to do exactly the same thing on Blackboard. Generally speaking, I would have probably said that. Actually, Abdullah is using Blackboard, aren't you? So you mentioned. I thought Blackboard was absolutely terrible. So I mean, I was an undergraduate student in 2006. That's when I started my undergraduate degree. And from what I can tell, Blackboard has barely changed from then to when we ditched it last year. So I would find it quite surprising if Blackboard had been any good for it. I thought Canvas seemed to work really, really well. I think because the way Canvas sets out a kind of, they call it modules, but it's basically different lectures. You can kind of, you can show students what they should be doing each week. And I think I mentioned the sort of the flow of learning that I was trying to get my head around. I thought it was really useful to communicate that to them. I don't know how that would have looked on Blackboard, but my instinct is it wouldn't have been as user-friendly. So I thought it seemed to have worked really well. The recordings seem to go in there fine and seem to show pretty well, but maybe Abdullah's got a different experience with Blackboard and I'm being grossly unfair.
Yeah, thanks. So second question, you touched on a point about, when the students come up with ideas and it coming really from their own frame of reference. So, just wondering what your opinion is, because I found this, when I've been teaching entrepreneurship, the ideas that naturally come from the person's frame of reference, their experience. What's your opinion about perhaps giving some type of hints to students about different ideas?
Well, I usually prompt them to say, look, these are kind of common pitfalls in things that students come up with. And usually you see a lot of trends. So you see a lot at the moment, things like health boxes that are posted through the post, that sort of thing, because that's quite common. And I mentioned before, one common thing as well is students coming up with ideas for other students. And I tell them to try and avoid that, because students are unlikely to be the most lucrative market out there, because students don't have that much money really. And of course they face problems, social environmental issues associated with those groups, but I try to get them to push into thinking about different areas. So I give them hints, but ultimately the module is assessed on a reflective essay. So it's about their learning. So if they can look back and evaluate and say, you know what, we should have been a bit more ambitious, or I should have thought a little bit more creatively in that process. This is what I can do next time. Then that to me is fine. It's difficult they can't necessarily see that at the beginning. It's difficult to get that across, but what I want them to do is to be able to see it at the end.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Just another final quick question. When you're doing it face to face, of course, students have a chance to ask questions and things, and you can kind of talk to the whole group. When it's online, did you find that you got a lot of questions that came online, through whatever system you use, and just really wondered what system you use to manage all the questions that may have come up?
Well, what I didn't show on that slide about the way our module looked this year, and I'm looking at Effie here because we did this, Effie taught the first semester of this module, so similar experience, but all of, we had these seminars, we had the pre-recorded lectures, but we also had discussion boards. My experience was that students just didn't use them. And so they much prefer to send you an email to ask a question, or to have a, what I did was I basically said, I'm going to be on Zoom at exactly the same time as the discussion board is live. So if you want to come and ask me a question, do it that way. And they seem to much prefer that format. I'm sure there's someone more skilled than I am at thinking about how to get students to interact using discussion boards. But I couldn't, no matter what I did, they didn't really seem to engage with it.
Right, okay, thanks.
Okay, Laila or Katira, any questions? Or Ify, have you got anything to share from your experience, or what you want to take over from Jonathan for next term? Or
I would totally agree both with Abdullah and Jonathan when it comes to the discussion boards. To bring this experience, it's quite similar with Jonathan. They didn't interact at all. No matter what I said, no matter it was just a dead end for all of them. So I think that what was missing, and what I think is not working with the discussion board, is this one-to-one interaction that you have, instead of just, and someone might say, okay, it's quite the same with the emails, but do not forget that the email is not a group. It's not on a group aspect. It is based on an individual one-to-one Q&A in a sense. I think that most of them, if they didn't use the emails, they've asked for a one-to-one Zoom meeting.
okay.
This Zoom meeting, sometimes it might have been an individual one. Sometimes it was with a group of students that they might have same questions, or they might have different questions. So for me, discussion boards haven't worked at all. Again, in line with Jonathan, I don't know whether this is a lack of experience or lack of skills in my case, but I don't think that they would prefer the discussion boards at all. Whether this was about posting any questions, whether it was about posting answers to the activities or individual activities that they have to go through during semester one, because I think that Jonathan has mentioned that in semester one, it is purely theoretical in a sense. We have all of the theory-based lectures, but still those are split it into sections where they need to undertake specific activities, watch videos, read articles. So some kind of practical basis is involved in there. So I've asked the students to go back and interact via the discussion board for each one of those sections separately, and the different activities, or discuss the article, or when we had some questions about the article, no one ever back. But this is my experience so far when it comes to that part.
Yeah. I mean, I used Blackboard as well previously on Moodle when it was still existing. I'm not sure if that still exists. In China, right? And also they didn't contribute. But I think what we tried is that they don't contribute individually, but they're posting questions and comments as a group. So because we thought you don't want to put yourself out with a stupid question or with a stupid comment that could be perceived as you haven't got a clue or you don't know what you're talking about. But if it's posted by the whole group, you have a bit more the security of, I can hide behind the other four who asked that stupid question. So I think that might be worth trying, that you say, you know, the group needs to post questions and there's one group leader who just writes it, right? Katira also says thank you, Jonathan and Abdullah. She just can't speak, okay? Any other last questions or comments? Or yeah, Chris?
Just a quick question actually for Abdullah.
Yeah.
So Abdullah, thanks. And I was interested about that local case study you were talking about. Maybe it's just a clarification. So the students you were teaching, were these international business students?
Yes. So they're international business, their program, but the module is looking at more sort of social and sustainable business.
Right,
so
right,
that's
right.
Why this is a sort of more sustainable venture.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the principles you're trying to get across in the case study, what I'm getting at is,
so looking at sort of the startup process, and she started this business at the beginning of this pandemic. So it's kind of how she generated that idea of coming up with the business idea to reduce plastic and or sort of delivering to vulnerable people. So she started as a fresh fruit and veg delivery, zero plastic, and delivering to the neighbors who are sort of in the old age and couldn't go out. And that was the initial idea. But now the business is really up and running, over a year old now, and it's doing really well. And I'm hoping to do a paper on that now. So that's
all right, great.
That's I'm writing an abstract. But it's like really the students connected with it, and I was able to bring her as a guest speaker in the class,
Right.
and then the students can see the website, and I wrote about the business, so I did the case study myself, a little bit of description, and then she was able to share her own experience, which is, I think the students can connect really well, and that was the real benefit.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to thank Jonathan and Abdullah very much for your presentation. It has been very insightful. And if anyone has any questions, you can reach out to us and then we can discuss online on a discussion board if you like. So our next webinar will be on Tuesday. We have Fiona Whitehurst, Dr. Paul Richard, Wendy Parvin, who used in the Creative Spark project a virtual createathlon. I hope I pronounce that properly. A virtual workshop where you bring students together to actually do something physically rather than teaching them theory. So they produced a toolkit that is anyone from Creative Spark can use that, and they will introduce that toolkit next week. So do join us again, and also please don't forget to fill out the survey at the end, which I will email you, and it has all the upcoming dates. So feel welcome to join anytime again. We have 3 more webinars coming, and for now, thank you all very, very much. It's been a real pleasure and a great discussion, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.